First, though, former state senator John Eichelberger is joining us. He is a Pennsylvania state co-chair for U.S. term limits. Senator Eichelberger, welcome to KDKA Radio. Good to have you, sir.
Oh, good to be on the show. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for making time for us. This idea of term limits, I'm a little confused about it. And the reason why is that people love their particular member of Congress or the person that they're sending to represent in whether it's Washington or in Harrisburg, but we don't like all the other ones. So we want ours to be able to stay. We just recognize we don't have the ability to vote out other people we don't like, and we want a system in place that forces them out. Is that what term limits ultimately are, or the proposition of term limits?
Well, the polling shows that it's well over 80% of the American public wants to have term limits on their on Congress, the House and the Senate. So, I mean, you do have some, some folks that like their person. That's very true. But in general, they would like to have term limits enforced. So the way to do that is to have a constitutional amendment to get that done, and that's what United States term limits their mission is, and in Pennsylvania we're working toward getting that done. There's resolutions introduced in the House and Senate, and there's a process of how to do that, and it's in Article 5 in our United States Constitution. There's a process to amend the Constitution, and this is well underway. There's a lot of activity across the country getting Article 5 amendments passed, so that we can get 2/3 of the states to do it, and then it'll be in Congress's hands to advance that application and approve some kind of term limits legislation.
Okay. You mentioned the 80% poll. Aside from there are so many people, apparently, at least according to the poll, that want this done, is there a more practical reason why you would co-chair this?
Well, I've always been a believer in term limits. I sponsored when I was, I'm a retired state senator in Pennsylvania. When I was in the Senate, I sponsored term limits legislation for the state legislature. And 15 states do have term limits on their state legislatures. There's just too much, it's too difficult to beat an incumbent congressman or United States senator. The name ID's almost 100%. The money, the influence that they have, it's very difficult to beat sitting legislators, even in the state legislature. It's tough. I know I did that. I beat an incumbent when I ran, but it was very tough to do. I think it was back in those days. I don't know what it is today, but in the state legislature in Pennsylvania, it was less than 2% of incumbents would lose. So, in fact, out of I think there's 4 ways to do away with an incumbent, and resignation, going to jail, and death were all higher percentages than beating somebody in an election.
When it comes to term limits, what kind of term limits are you proposing?
We're not. We're just asking for term limits, and then the legislature, the Congress, would figure out what that would be. There's proposals in there now looking at various things that people have come up with on their own. Generally, a couple of terms probably for a U.S. Senator, that would be 12 years, and then different variations of how many years a House member would stay. But it would be somewhere in that range, I would think. But that would be up to the Congress to propose, and then the states would have to ratify that. So I'm sure they would do something reasonable because they'd be under a lot of pressure to do so. And then the states, 3/4 of the states would have to ratify that. So if it wasn't reasonable, I don't think it would be ratified. But we've got to have some checks and balances on it, I think. And it would help in lots of
Is there any legitimacy?
Go ahead.
Former State Senator John Eichelberger joining us on the Disk Institute of Pittsburgh Newsline. Is there any legitimacy in your mind in the idea that if we have term limits, that you're going to take power away from lawmakers and give greater power to those who are lobbying those lawmakers. And so as a result, the unelected ultimately wield more power than the elected of the American people.
Yeah, that's a popular but false premise that's out there. When you look historically at lobbyists and what they do and what they say and where their money goes, they're with long-term people. They like long-term people. And when they do contribute to various organizations, most of their money goes to anti-term limit groups when it comes to this issue. So they know that it's not necessarily a good thing for them because there'll be people coming and going. There won't be people that will build these large power bases when they're sitting in office, and they'll have to go in and state their case and prove, their points to people just based on facts and information, and then move on to something else because they won't have those relationships that they have now with people that have been there for decades. And so the proof shows that they won't have the influence, and they are opposed to it. And certainly, if they thought they could gain more influence, they'd be putting their money into our cause, and they're not.
How do you convince lawmakers in Washington that this is something that they should be doing, considering they have a 98% retention rate? Why would they do this?
Well, I think the polling is the biggest thing. A lot of these guys put their finger in the wind to see which way the numbers are going. And what happens with a lot of these efforts is that once there's enough critical mass, there's enough momentum building around the country, they'll react to it, or they'll be criticized for not doing so. And shows like yours and others, will be on top of it, and newspapers are joining in, and they'll certainly have a publicity problem on their end if they're trying to make an argument why they should stay for 30 years or longer, and it's going to be a tough argument for them to make. So, and they'll react to that, and that's what's happened in the past in our country when momentum builds. Even though there may not be 2/3 of the states ready to do the application, as that's the legal term, they'll do something for that issue because they'll be forced to by the public.
Former State Senator John Eichelberger, he is one of the Pennsylvania State co-chairs for U.S. term limits, and he's joining us on the Disc Institute of Pittsburgh Newsline. Senator, thank you very much for your time. Do appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and have a great
Absolutely.
Thanksgiving.
Thank you very much. I hope you have a great Thanksgiving as well.